Hello everyone, it's History Behind the Warrior, and welcome back to another Mortal Kombat video. With us at the end of Chaos Reigns and presumably at the end of MK1's story, at least from what we're currently aware of. With the very limited utilization of the roster during the expansion, it does naturally raise the question of what exactly has happened to the rest of the cast. Where are they now and what has become of them following Chaos Reigns? Well, to streamline this video and touch on the 30 plus characters, I will be grouping them together depending on their location, as it does give us an idea of where everyone is, any significant character moments that has happened in the post-game, as well as give us an idea of who may and who may not be coming back moving forward. But as always, before we do begin, just before we start, I would of course super appreciate it if you could give this video a thumbs up. It's a small thing, but it really does go a long way here, especially for supporting the channel in the algorithm. And if you want to see more MK content, please do feel free to sub if you want to stick around. Anyway, let's get right into things. Now, seeing as we played from the perspective of the heroes of Earthrealm, let's start off with them taking us to the Wu Shi Academy, because it does look like in the aftermath of the base game, and presumably the DLC, it becomes home to a number of different important figures, with the first being the infamous Kung Lao. The former self-absorbed and arrogant Shaolin is now one that practices humility and respect, now serving as a trainer and advisor to a very young prodigy, Shijenko. Seeing the potential he possesses of replication, this young man does have a very bright future in front of him. Just hopefully that this time going forward, Shijenko himself will not absorb Kung Lao's hubris, something that did send him on a wild rampage and force Liu Kang's hand to wipe his mind clean. Next, we do have the new Raiden here, and this new iteration of the character actually looks to tap into that of his older self, because after encountering his god half, he came to realize the potential he had and the reason why he was stripped of his divinity, how his rage could be weaponized and misguide him. Thus, he would go on to train with Kuei Liang in order to better temper that rage, to temper that resentment. Now, our next member is the demon Ashura, and this is a really interesting state of affairs, because in the aftermath of the events of the base game, the demoness actually maintains a long distance relationship with Caesar, as he himself resides in Outworld. But although the war was over, the battle was not finished, with Ashura actively seeking out her demon sister Serena, and finally freed her of Quan Chi's influence. It's currently unknown if the pair reside at the academy, but I do believe it to be quite softly implied here. And of course, we now move on to Fire God Liu Kang. Having relinquished his role of timekeeper to Geras, the former Shaolin is scarred from the effects of the hourglass, meaning that his immortality is more fragile than ever, for death is now a possibility for Liu Kang. Little is known of what his path dictates moving forward, especially in the fall of Chaos Reigns. Now, beyond these characters, the only other figure mentioned but isn't quite present in-game is Liu's former Shaolin brother-in-arms, Kuei, because in this new era and timeline, he functions as more of a trainer at the facility, someone to help guide the next generation. Sadly though, that is all that's known of him in the current present, only that he does exist here. Now, moving over to Japan, we do have the Shirai Ryu, led by the combined might of Scorpion and his wife Harumi. And this iteration of the clan is home to a number of different beloved pivotal figures, with the first being Tomas Verbada, also known as Smoke. Here, he now acts as more of a tutor and mentor to this timeline's iteration of Hanzo Hasashi, a feral street urchin with unbridled talent and rage, one that they seek to tame and discipline. And the Shirai Ryu would also be home to a former member of the Yakuza and cousin to Kenshi, Takeda Takahashi. Having been rehabilitated from his criminal ways, he finally saw the Yakuza for what they were, criminals that had placed their family under their thumb. So by slowly nursing his wounds and creating a brotherly bond with Hanzo, Takeda was able to train and refine his craft for his crusade. But it is worth noting that unlike the other members of the Shirai Ryu, Takeda by all intents and purposes was not Shirai Ryu, wishing to stay firmly detached to the clan as he took down the Yakuza. And this takes us to the most current and recent addition to the clan, Cyrax, who was a former member of the Kuei. Following the events of Chaos Reigns and having redeemed herself in the eyes of Kuei, Cyrax is the latest addition to the clan, still utilizing her suit of armor despite its origin to the Kuei. Because of this, at first, Cyrax did struggle to settle in with her fellow clan members, with many still seeing her as a traitor in their eyes. It would only be through time, humility, and selflessness where she would earn their respect, settling into the Kuei as her new home and family. So, with the main ninja clan faction covered, let's move on to their rivals, the Kuei. Now led by the presumed combined might of Bi-Han and his technophile spouse, Sector, it does look like following Chaos Reigns, despite Liu Kang's warning, she would still go on to actively defy the Fire God's wishes, releasing Bi-Han from his cleansing chamber at the Temple of Elements. By doing so, the Kuei had finally and officially turned excommunicado. So with the power of chaos at his fingertips, as well as an endless quench for grandeur, the duo would envision a future where the greatest enemies would fall. Thus, in the fall of Chaos Reigns, it's very strongly hinted that the Cyber Initiative is finally underway. All in all, the Kuei have an exceptionally interesting future ahead of them. And whilst we do only currently have 2 characters confirmed off the base roster, it has been strongly foreshadowed that Frost still follows Bi-Han's side. Whether or not she's a believer of noob cybots, that's yet to be seen. But considering how zealotous and elitist she's been in the past with the Kuei, I very much doubt that this will change her position. Now shuffling onto Earthrealm, we do have a number of different confirmed characters on the mortal plane. It looks like following the events of the base game, Johnny has gone back to his life in the Hollywood Hills. Yet this time things would be quite different in that regard. Deciding to hang up his acting boots, Johnny would now serve as a director and slowly introduce the concepts of Outworld through the big screen, preparing Earthrealm for a world beyond their own. As for Kenshi, well, the blind swordsman would actually go on to band with Jackson Briggs, with both being aligned against the Yakuza. Once Briggs learns of Outworld and the threat it does possess, the two would go on to create the Outworld Investigation Agency, combating Outworld anomalies that dare attempt to lay siege on their home. And I do love how everyone's doing this whilst Madame Bo's just chilling in her tea house. And really, their caution isn't misplaced here, because there's quite a few threats that do currently reside on Earthrealm's home turf. With the first being the vampire Nitara, having transversed to the mortal plane in order to feast and farm blood for her people. A noble yet reckless way to quench down their red thirst. Shang Tsung, on the other hand, looks to be in Earthrealm for far more malevolent purposes. The reason why is yet to be known, but after having drained the Well of Souls and unlocked a new level of power, you always know that Shang is scheming something reckless. So, with the external threats out the way, let's move on to the internal threats presented from within. More specifically, the Red Dragons and the Black Dragons. Although never seen in game nor physically represented by any previous member, the Black Dragons here are only referenced to in name only, being a faction that does exist in the present, but is one that's entirely off screen, where they presumably look to be doing their own thing. The Red Dragons, on the other hand, look to be a very different conversation. With a chokehold on the Yakuza, it does look like the son of Argus, Dagon, is the mastermind behind the crime syndicate, using them as puppets and figures to hide in plain sight. By doing so, he's able to conduct his own nefarious plans. For what these plans could be as of right now, that is completely unknown. But the secrecy of his influence is no longer hidden, as they would be infiltrated by Takeda Takahashi, resulting in a very quick and brief skirmish where Mavado is slain. So, with the characters of Earthrealm covered, this does allow us to move on to their compatriots in Outworld, starting off with the Outworld royal line and those aligned to the Empress. And of course, right at the very top here, we do have Empress Melina. And unfortunately, due to our very brief and limited time with the character during Chaos Reigns, fighters. We don't get an entirely great idea of just how her rule is faring, at least in comparison to her mother's. However, unlike Sindel, who isolated and shunned those afflicted with Tarkards, with Baraka by her side, she's shown a far more sympathetic approach to their disease, something that she herself can clearly relate to. So she has begun to help those afflicted with this horrible infection, not fully curing it, but making the process a lot less painful. Beyond this though, we don't know much more about her reign. I mean, hell, we don't even know if she still maintains an intimate relationship with Tanya. It hasn't been touched on again since the end of the game's story, with the Umgadi leader herself pulling up the corruption sown in the royal court, unraveling the identities of those responsible for Jared's death. So with Chameleon by her side, Tanya is able to purge the corruption amongst the High Court. So with the Empress out the way, let's move on to her younger sister, Kitana. And much has become of her following the events of the base game, now actually a general amongst her own people. Whilst it was a particularly shaky start, with many not taking the princess serious, she very quickly proved that she was capable of handling this army, showing that whilst her methods were far more extravagant than Shao's brutality, the execution of those that threatened the throne was never more swift. Now following the events of the base game, we do have Syzoth, aka Reptile, acting as an emissary for his people, and allying the world of Zartera with the royal throne. Now outside of the relationship he does have with Ashra, upon returning to Zartera, Syzoth was horrified to learn a terrible truth, that the humanoid transformations he was capable of was not actually an anomaly. It was part of an internal conspiracy where his fellow kin would be slain as children should they show such effects. As for who was the mastermind behind this is all currently left as a mystery. Another member that is now on great terms with the royal line is longtime family friend Li Mei. Whilst at the end of the base story she's elevated to that of a more diplomatic position, the politics that played behind the scenes and toyed with the lives of many wasn't something suited for her. Thus, Li Mei would very quickly return back to her role as leader of the Sundo police force, content and happy at this very straightforward life. But it isn't entirely all smooth sails, as there are a few questions currently raised about other fighters amongst the court, whose fate can only be described as best as uncertain. The first is the former High Mage of Outworld and traitor, Zephyro, aka Rain. In the fall of the base game story, the Hydromancer was lost, seeking guidance and assistance, and due to his desperation, he believed he found an ally in Havoc. Manipulated by his ambitions, Rain was convinced to flood his home world, killing tens of thousands of Sidons in the name of chaos. Little did he know of the devastation he actually caused before he walked through the streets, decorated in the corpses and blood of the innocent. It's here where the harsh, real realization of his actions caught up to him. So seeking atonement, Rain would willingly give himself up to Outworld, wishing to pay for his crimes as he simply could not live with his guilt. The repercussions of such events would be felt in Outworld, as many of the Sidons were forced to immigrate over to Outworld, having Hotaru act as their leader, one of the very few to survive the tide. Now, it does seem like Rain isn't the only traitor to have turned against Shao, as during an arcade ladder ending, we do see a centaur, presumably Motaro, fighting alongside Kitana, where she's battling off the forces of Shao. Now, I can't say that this is entirely locked in stone and is 100% certain, plus it doesn't help that Outworld's army and Shao's army still wear the same armor. But this is still something I absolutely did want to point out. Our last figure amongst Outworld's High Court that has unfortunately defected from their side has been the Master of Souls, Ermac. Following Melina's rise to Empress, Jared would act as an advisor until Ermac regained control of the collective. With the Emperor's personality receding back into his being, the damaged Ermac sought out help from his former creator Quan Chi, only to then be betrayed by his master, as he sought to put him under his thumb and control once more. It is only until Sindel stepped in from the collective to which the sorcerer was stopped. Having escaped from his master, Ermac, for the first time in his life, had control of his own path. He was free to fight and do whatever he wished. Now, on the other side of this civil war, we do have General Shao, who still stands very defiant to Sindel's line, looking to take Outworld by force by any and all means necessary. And we will touch on those methods in a bit, because with Reiko by his side, Shao seek to subjugate any and all other races that were soured by the royal line. And this does include the likes of the Chitin, but the true gem in the crown would be the dragon lost to time, Onaga. Sealed away by Shao's ancestors, the general would have him unleashed, having Reiko tame the dragon for their time of need. And for a while, it did look to be a success. But it does look like following the events of Chaos Reigns, the Great Dragon was able to shake off his influence, defecting from the general's side and being a threat to everyone in Outworld. As for what comes next, that's anyone's guess, but he's a devastating threat that cannot be overlooked by both Shao and the royal line. Now, coming to our final few characters here, we are now essentially touching on the scattered strayed souls of the new era. Ones established, spread, or foreshadowed across the realms. So, starting off with this category, we do have the Warden Eternal, Geras. And since the base game, Geras has undergone quite the upgrade, although it isn't necessarily reflected in Chaos Reigns. With Liu Kang having relinquished the Hourglass of Time, it has now fallen into the care of Geras, who has taken it to an astral plane to monitor the Fire God's vision. With time on his side, Geras looks to protect this timeline from all types of external threats. Next, we do have the Outworlder, Quan Chi. And after the events of the base game, having been effectively exiled from his home, the Necromancer would continue to follow his dark path, taking him to the deepest depths of any of the realms, the Netherrealm. Here, Quan would learn of the vilest magics possible to overthrow Liu, believing that by doing so, he could lay claim to the Hourglass for himself. Thus, his own sinister plans of control and manipulation begin. And outside of his arcade ladder ending, it is shown that he has a very keen interest in Shinnok's amulet, as he even appoints Sector to steal it from the Temple of Elements. And in an intro with Liu Kang, it is actually believed so. It won't be entirely clear until the next game and installment, but knowing the nature of Quan Chi, it's not a matter of if, but when he obtains the amulet. And talking of the Temple of Elements, Fujin, where is he? Well, I have a sneaking suspicion that something very different is occurring in this timeline with the character. Being completely absent in Noob's arcade ladder ending, battling the elemental gods, with Raiden's sibling having been foreshadowed to be female in this timeline, I have a strong sneaking suspicion that much like Cyrax and Sector, we may yet have another gender bent take on the character. Because this idea was very briefly toyed with in his own arcade ladder ending in 11, and is clearly something they have explored with Cyrax and Sector. Currently, very little is known or even locked in right now, but that is all we currently know of Fujin in this new era, so it may be very possible that this is the direction they take with the character. This then takes us on to the dynamic duo of Havok and Darius. And honestly, very little is known of what has become of these two following the events of Sido, as even Darius himself is more or less completely absent in the game's aftermath. As for Havok, we do know that he's currently hunting down the Sidons in Outworld, but it does seem to be with very little to no success right now. And talking of Outworld, we do have a number of Outworld characters who we have no idea of what's become of them following the base game. Like we see Goro and we hear about Shiva, Kotal and Countess Jade, but beyond their very minimal roles, whether that be appearing in story, being name dropped or appearing in dialogue, all of these characters are simply not given a real resolution by the end of the game. We only know that they merely exist in this new world and era. As for Sindel though, that's one character that I can confirm is definitely dead. But like that everyone, this has been it for this very long, very drawn out and very compact video. This has actually been quite a highly requested video from many of you, so I do hope this has given you plenty of answers as to what's been going on with characters, especially following the events of Chaos Reigns. As I've been purposely staving this video off, just so I could give you all a real proper conclusion following the events of the game. So, with that said and everything covered here, what do you think is next for some of the characters I mentioned here? Who do you see coming back, and what arcs would you like to see explored? Please do comment down below. But for now everyone, that has been it for me. So as always, stay strong, stay well, and I'll catch you in the next one.